Okay, my video blog. A lot of you are watching the harrowing images on Gaza and wondering how this conflict can be and how Israel, which is a very moral democratic state, can inflict this kind of carnage. Look, I'm Jewish and Judaism upholds the highest standards of decency, humanity, and of course we gave the world the 10 Commandments and one of them is do not murder. But here's the two basic issues. Number one, the problem with fighting terrorists is that it's not Israel strong with tanks and helicopter gunships, and they're very, very weak. The problem is the terrorists are always strong. You see, the terrorists are infinitely powerful. They have removed from themselves all moral constraints. They don't care if they lob 6,000 rockets that are aimed at civilians. These aren't aimed at military targets. These rockets are aimed at kindergartens, hospitals, schools. They dismember pregnant women. They decapitate children. Terrorists are the really powerful force. That's why democracies are always weaker in fighting terrorism, because democracies take one hand and they tie it behind their back. They decide to only do the moral thing. You can have the United States fighting a war in Iraq with the largest military arsenal ever assembled, but the United States is a moral democracy, and it's not going to send its jets against hospitals, it's not going to send its tanks against schools. And the terrorists use these places to launch attacks. So what Israel needs to suddenly do is strike surgically, even within these schools, at a rocket launcher. That's very difficult. I mean, even with modern day precision-guided munitions that can be very precise, you can make mistakes. It's horrible. No one, God forbid, ever wants to see any innocent child, an Israeli child, a Palestinian child, Jews, Arabs, we're all God's children equally. Equally God's children, and God loves us all equally. The problem is that the Palestinian population are being held hostage by a terrorist organization that just wants to continually batter Israel until it destroys it. And it's stated so explicitly that it's committed to Israel's destruction. The second thing you have to remember is, through this entire conflict, is that you can't have a group, a terrorist group, that is on Israel's border and sets up a terrorist state that continually just murder civilians without Israel responding. I mean, at the end of the day, it just can't go on. The Palestinian people are a brilliant, educated people. They were often called the Jews of the Arab world, insofar as they always emphasized books, and they also wandered like the Jews from place to place. There really should be peace between these two nations. It will come about, I believe, as Golda Meir once said, to paraphrase her, when the Palestinian people love their children more than they hate Israel. Israel's not perfect. No country is. Israel's going to make mistakes. But Israel is a vibrant democracy where even its military has to answer to courts, it has to answer to elected politicians, to the people themselves. Hamas seems to be answering to its own inner-guided hatred. The Palestinian people have to focus on building their institutions of universities and hospitals and an economy. When they do that, they will really flourish, and our two nations will live side by side. I, as a Jew, mourn the loss of every innocent Palestinian who is my brother and who is my sister, who, God forbid, is harmed, an innocent person who's harmed in this conflict, just as I hope that my Arab brothers and sisters mourn the death of every Israeli who's harmed in this conflict. We are all God's children. We have to live together. Islam is a beautiful, glorious world religion that has such an incredible history of education, rights for women when they didn't have rights, going back about 1,000 years. I mean, I chart all this in essays that I've written. You can look it up on Shmuley.com. It's only because of Islam that we have Aristotle and Plato. They were preserved. The great Islamic writers preserved the Greek philosophers at a time when Christianity was suppressing those thinkers. Islam was always an enlightened religion, a forward-looking religion. And I know it can be that today, and it is in so many parts of the world. My hope is that Jews and Arabs and the Palestinians and Israelis, of course, will live together in peace under the one God, and that we will make this world a beautiful place.